Welcome to Empowered, Mind-Body Inspiration. The mind is the map to wholeness, wellness, health. The heart is the key to genius and inspiration. Join me and my guests as we explore how to release and rewire into who you truly are, unique, whole, and empowered. Please like, share, and subscribe. Spiral up, spiral out. Welcome, everyone. Today we have Marian Boyd, who graduated from Wheaten Grad School in Illinois with an MA in Counseling and Psychology. She is co-author of the book series, Remember It's Okay, Helping People with Grief. Marian, as I've got to know you and have learned, about your experience and your history in life, I ponder how incredible it is that we have these experiences that, when learned from and processed, become what we offer to the world in a really wonderful way. And that's what you have done with this book series. So just tell us about these early experiences of grief. I believe you had one at 2, and then again with a miscarriage.
Yeah, you're right. These experiences really have shaped me and have given me curiosity about how things might have been better, and then how we might learn from those lost experiences and how I've learned from them, and then what I've been able to do. And truly, they have become the foundational, laid the groundwork for what I've done in grief support work. Yeah, back when I was 2 years old, my family, which consisted of my dad and my mom and me, and then my young brother was born when I was 2. We were living in Chad, Africa at the time. They went there when I was 4 months old. And so, as you can imagine, as a 2.5-year-old, almost 3-year-old, it's all I knew. I was surrounded by gorgeous, lovely Chadian folks. They were my friends. They were my caregivers. They were my family. I was learning that language. I was used to heat. It was hot. I had to be protected from scorpions and snakes, and wore a little pith helmet because to keep the sun off my head, whatever. And that was my life. I played. I had a special Chadian fellow that would look after me and protect me while my parents were doing their work. And then for me, very, very suddenly, we left. We suddenly left Central Africa and returned to Canada. And it was the middle of winter. It was freezing cold. There was snow. I'd never seen that. I'm bundled up. I'm freezing. And I'm only seeing white people. And they're only speaking English. And suddenly at 2.5, I didn't know then, obviously, but I know now from what I know that I would have experienced a massive, massive loss. And it happened because my father was extremely sick with malaria. And so he's sick. My mom's looking after a newborn, plus trying to look after me. And they're trying to make plans. And honestly, I think it's bare basic survival. And certainly nobody's there thinking about, oh my goodness, this little 3-year-old, 2-year-old is going through major grief. How are we going to support her? It's like, let's just get to Canada and get my dad to a doctor. So I know, looking back as a psychotherapist, that was extremely impacting for me as a young child in ways that I created anxiety. I didn't know how to deal with my emotions. I was fearful. All kinds of residual things that I now know are when people don't have an opportunity to move through their grief. Even a toddler, they will be left with outcomes that are life impacting, relationally impacting, and a sense of self and safety.
Yeah. So I know as a homeopath too, we learned, or I have learned with Divya Shambra, that the unconscious mind just absorbs everything from 0 to 7. And it's not like the conscious mind overrides it and says, oh, it's okay because of this. Right. So we carry these programs forward into life and not even aware. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And it's happening at such a nonverbal time. So
Mhm.
you don't even have those hooks in your own, as you say, in your conscious part to be able to say, oh, okay, we need to leave because dad's sick and blah, blah, blah. Maybe if I was 10, I could have done that. But at 2.5, you don't have that. You don't have the framework. Absolutely. So, but it's still very much very powerful, and it takes on a life of its own in a sense, right?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you become so easily triggered. And like you say, now you understand why you had anxiety and
Yes.
yeah, this deep
Yes.
sense of sadness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Big sense of loss, a big sense of sadness, and a big sense of loss of safety and familiarity, and then a huge learning curve to transition to this new space. So, we'll often think of a toddler, if they lose a parent or a grandparent or someone that's been very much a part of their world. Oh, well, they don't know what's going on, therefore they don't grieve. Oh, yes, they do, because
Yeah.
they have already begun to form attachments. And when those attachments are shaken and disrupted, they don't feel safe anymore. And so they really do need someone to help them find the words, the language, and transition. And when that's not available, there's residual impact. So we see that in a lot of toddlers around. And, as you mentioned, I did adoption work, and we used to see a lot of that in children who'd been adopted in early months and years of their life. Some of the residual work that needed to be done to help them be able to feel safe in relationships again.
Right. Because this led you into helping people that were adopting.
That's right. Yeah.
So you
But
saw it on both ends, parents that were grieving because they couldn't have children,
yes.
and the children who were suffering because they had gone through stress or
Yeah,
difficult times when they weren't even able to remember, probably.
that's right. Yeah. Well, this is most of it's pre-memory for sure. And I guess the other, as you mentioned, the other life impacting loss, and this truly became my pivotal place, was after years of experiencing infertility, my husband and I were able to celebrate the fact that I was pregnant. And that was a joyful time for about 3 months. And at about 13 weeks, I miscarried. And that was not a process that I was, it was hard. I mean, the hopes and the dreams and the joys that we had longed for, that we worked so hard for after years of infertility, and finally it had happened, suddenly were just gone. And I still and this is decades ago, I still remember lying in the hospital waiting for an ultrasound to really declare that in fact the baby had died. We already knew all of this already, but my brain did not want to believe it. I still wanted to hold on to it. And then after the miscarriage, I was in the hospital, and I remember consciously wanting to go into this deep, deep, dark place of pain and the loss. And I had never experienced consciously that kind of loss before. And I thought to myself, I'm going to go as deep into this. And it was, for me, it was a pit. I want to go as deep as I can into this pit of dark grief to see what it feels like. But also, this is the place where I still feel very connected to my baby. It's in this place of this dark. And I just still can remember those moments of sobbing and sweating and lying in the hospital, really not caring what other people were thinking or whatever. It's like, no, this is my time to go as deep as I can into this. And part of me was learning about myself and about grief as I did that. Now that I think back on it, it's like I had to do this. I had to find out what this was going to really, really feel like. And I still recall the other impacting thing in that moment was, my husband's grieving. So many people around us are grieving. And so we can hardly be there for each other. But a close friend of mine came to the hospital, and she hardly said a word. She just was with me. She showed up, and she got a wet towel and she started wiping my face, and she started just being there and wiping my arms and just letting me sob and weep, but I wasn't alone in my pit. And that was huge. I thought that's what I needed. I didn't want anybody to make me feel better. I didn't want to feel better. I didn't want anybody to tell me, and some of the things that people said later, well, oh, well, there must have been something wrong with the baby, therefore your body knew it needed to. I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to hear that. That might have been true, but I was not ready to hear any of this. Truly, that experience, and we've named the little one Adam, and it jettisoned me into the arena of working in grief and just going, hey, you know what? I needed to do that. It was transformative for me to do it. I survived. What helped, what didn't help. And I just learned so much through that. And I still to this day hold that as one of my core nugget go-to places. And as you said, then that also then became my work with adoptive couples. I worked in the adoption field, in private adoption, for close to 30 years. And I could relate to adoptive couples that were experiencing infertility and grief. I knew what they were talking about. I knew the procedures they were talking about. And then I was able to relate to them when the joy of a child came along, because later on we actually were able to conceive, and I now have 2 children. And so I know that joy. I know the joy and the pain that is associated with the loss. And then so I could relate to a birth parent who is literally giving birth and then losing. So to me, I was drawn into working with, first of all, adoption because of this incredible story of adoption. It's just remarkable. The triad, the adoptive couples that I met were phenomenal folks. The birth parents, courageous, and their families, birth families, and then adoptees as they reconcile their shift in their life that moved them from one family tree to another, and how we could soften those experiences for people. And absolutely, as you said, those are the things that have informed me, along with all my education and all of that, but that could keep at a head level. This brought in my heart, and I was totally able to be present and show up and be present in each of the stories and hear, not just because of, and then say, oh, I know what you feel. No. I will never say that, because I don't know how somebody else feels. But I have a story and it might parallel to yours. And then it brought validity to who I was and what I was doing at more than just a professional level. So pretty powerful. And I'm, it's a weird thing to say in hindsight. I'm not grateful that I had a miscarriage, but I'm grateful for what I learned and experienced and how it shaped me. And I can embrace that. Yeah.
Beautiful. I remember going through grief myself and meditating on it, and it just came to me, the words that you need to go through it.
Yes.
Right? Like, not to avoid it. You need to go into it, and you'll come out the other side, but that's really the only way.
Yeah. And I've also got to understand that grief is actually the gift of the process that allows us to come through into healing. If we didn't have the capacity to grieve, we would be stuck in these places of loss with no way to move. Grief gives us a way to move forward. I don't know if that makes sense, but that, to me, it takes the fear of grief away, because I see it as something that's actually really valuable, important, and necessary to our survival as human beings.
Yeah. And teaching others how to go through it and into it is just so important.
Yeah. And that became, it's interesting, became my life's mission, I guess you might say. I became people would call me the queen of grief. It's like, I don't know if that's a good title, but my heart just wanted to teach people how to grieve again and to teach people how to support grieving people. Those were the two things that I just kind of literally came down to, and that it's at a peer-to-peer level. It's human. We don't have to run to professionals when we're grieving. We can do this, especially if we have somebody walking with us in our grief.
Yeah. So what you said about connecting through the heart and really learning through the heart, I think is really instrumental too in all of this. And so what do you teach people that often we run from grief, like we are afraid of it, we don't know how to handle it. And so people will avoid these situations because they're painful, though, like they feel the pain.
Yeah.
So, yeah. How do you teach people to deal with that?
One of the things you just said is that we're a very pain avoidant society, and grief is painful, but pain isn't bad, as you would know. Pain is something that's teaching us something's going on and it needs attention. And so the pain of grief is something's going on and it needs attention. And so what I also have found is if people can have a sense of understanding, if they can say, okay, this is what grief looks like. I know I can get there. I'm way at the beginning part here. I've just had my loss. If I can have a sense of how this is going to unfold, it will help me feel like, okay, this is doable. And I think that's one of the things I would do a lot of training sessions for adoptive couples. We talk about the movement through grief. When I led a peer-based support program, I did training on this is the movement in grief. We made it very simple at that point, from the head to the heart to the combining head and heart. And then when Marina and I were talking about creating the books that we wanted to be able to teach people how to grieve, we tried to give it a whole new sense of movement, and we used the colors as far as moving in colors from the hot colors, red and orange and yellow, then into the cooler colors, green, turquoise, and light blue. And when we were thinking about that, I mean, everybody's aware of the stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote many years ago. The fascinating thing is that people mostly don't know that was her writing after her research of watching people in palliative care who knew they were dying. That was the process that they were going through. She never meant it for people who were actually the survivors, the ones that were living. And so what I found over the years is that those stages were really frustrating to people because they didn't feel like they fit in them right. And then they would feel like they weren't grieving right. So Marina and I really tried to think of a whole new way to show movement, because there is movement. And so that first hit of a loss, whether it's a loss of a loved one or it could be a life loss, could be loss of your job, it could be financial loss, it could be so many losses. Suddenly life has changed. It could be a diagnosis. And that first place, we called it, it's red. It's like this, you think of a stop sign. This is urgent and it's survival. And in that early place, it's really literally about just trying to find a way to survive. It's taking care of yourself, making sure you're eating, making sure you're drinking water, making sure you're getting some sleep, making sure that you've got somebody that you can talk to, making sure you have some outlets. So it's very, very practical. Think of somebody almost in a shock level, that they need to be warm. They need to have food and drink and be cared for. So that's in that early place. And then you will slowly begin to move into what we call the orange phase place. We call it orange. And this is where you're beginning to find you're beginning to find yourself, and there's an immediacy about the level of grief you're experiencing. So your emotions are becoming even stronger, not like the one in the red, which is a little bit, it's overpowering, but so much that you can't take it all in. Orange, you're beginning to take it in. You're beginning to become aware of the reality of your loss. And this is where people will need to have somebody that outlets, somebody that's going to listen to them talk, or this is where they might need to write poems, or they might just need to scream into a pillow, or whatever it is that they need to do, because all of these emotions are really starting to become, in a sense, more real in the orange level. And
right?
then
But that's often when people disappear.
that's exactly right.
Right? And you're
Yeah.
left alone, and
Yeah, that's very true. People show up right at the initial loss.
Yeah.
And then after, and there's no time frame on this. You could be in red for months. You could be in red for 6 weeks. But you're right. People have disappeared by that point, and they've gone on, and they go, okay, I helped you out at the very beginning. We have a really wrong understanding of how grief moves, because it can't be its full intensity from the get-go. You wouldn't be able to survive that. So it's like, okay, and then it slowly starts to escalate, and you become more aware of it as you're grieving. But as you're right, you can feel all the more isolated. And now you might be wondering, what's wrong with me? How come I feel worse now than I did back then? That is how grief shows itself.
Right. So to recognize this and know that you now need to reach out and actually,
that's right. That's exactly right.
Ask for help. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And then as you're in that, you'll start moving more into what we call yellow. And the yellow is beginning to come back to yourself in a growing awareness. So you're starting to be aware of, okay, these are the things that trigger my grief. These are the things that accelerate it and make it harder, or these are the things that, and what do I want to do about it? So you're starting to bring some awareness of your own personal grief loss and bringing awareness into your movement in your grief journey. And that is there's lots of questions here. Sometimes this is where the actual questions come of why and how did this happen, and what am I going to do now, and I don't know where I'm going. And this is a real befuddlement time, and yet trying to put pieces back together, becoming more aware of yourself as a grieving person, and aware of what works, what doesn't work, what helps, what doesn't help. And that's critical. Those are beautifully important times, really important times. And it's so personal.
Yeah. And even to recognize that you have been triggered and to allow yourself to go into the pain. Is
or to set. So for instance, after my miscarriage, the last place I wanted to go was to a baby shower.
Right.
And there was a time, there were months and months, and I'm at the age here where my friends are having babies. And, suddenly all I see are baby carriages, and it was hard. These were major triggers for me. And so I declined. I didn't go to I knew I was not ready. And I was being kind to myself. And some people say, oh, you should just force and show up and just do it. And no. I needed to matter in that moment. I needed to say, you know what, right now, I am aware that I can't do this, and enter into the joy of my friend, because I'm going to be so much more into the pain, my own pain, and I'll stay away from that trigger. I don't need to accelerate my grief. I have enough grief. So that was really important, to be self-care and being aware of yourself and knowing what works and for you. Like maybe you need to go for a hike. Maybe you need to dig in the garden. Maybe you need to not go to the baby shower. Maybe you need to step away from some of those Christmas parties. Like whatever it might happen to be, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, that's the title of the book. Okay. And I can imagine like times when I've had great grief too, is just feeding yourself that love and that care, and right. And that's what you're saying is do what's best for you. Love yourself.
Yeah. And you're caring for yourself as a grieving person. Sometimes I would say to people, you are getting to know who you are as a grieving person. You haven't met this person before. And now you're getting to know that person. And this person needs your care and your compassion and your interest. And that part of you needs to know that you are there for them. Yeah. And then after those hot colors, we can start to move into the cooler colors. In the book, we talk about green. And that's where we're learning to balance ourselves, and we continue our learning process. And this is starting to go, okay, maybe some of the things I have in my life right now aren't so smart. So maybe I'm going to reduce some of this. I'm learning how to balance with my ebb and flow of my grief. I'm learning how to balance more. And you're becoming more, what would be the word, landed in yourself a bit more at this point. Say, I'm getting a sense of who I am now, who I am on the other side of grief, just getting an inkling in that. And I'm learning about that. And then turquoise is the next color, and it starts asking some really interesting questions. Turquoise asks, what path am I on now? And I have an increased awareness and an increased curiosity. So it's like, okay, I've had this significant mammoth loss in my life. How am I integrating that loss into my life? How is that impacting my path of life that I'm on? And I'm curious to discover some of that about myself. And I'm aware, I'm much more cognitively aware in these things. And now we're moving towards pale blue, which is we're suddenly got more clarity of the path, beginning to move forward. And we have an increased openness. And that's like, I think that's what happened for me when I started doing adoption work. Like, I was finally able to go, I have clarity in my path now based on my losses. And wow, this is really enriching something. And I would never have chosen to move into adoption if it hadn't been for my own loss. And then I became aware of the fact that all of these adoptive couples don't know how they're grieving. They don't even know they're grieving. Let's give them words. Let's give them movement. Let's give them hope again. Because I also realized if somebody, say, were to adopt, can you imagine if you were integrating a child into your life through adoption and you were in the red survival space, what kind of an attachment you would have with your child?
Very guarded, right?
Guarded. And that's not what the child needs. And the child's not there to fix your pain, right? So we would talk about the movement through grief and then how it would relate to their attachment. And they all wanted an excellent attachment with their adoptive child. And I said, the process to get there is through, like you said, through grief. And when you are able to move through that journey, you'll come into that turquoise and that pale blue place. We didn't use those words then because Marina and I just created this concept. But if I'd had it then, I would have been able to say these words. And that's when attachment can be the fullest because you're ready, you're open at that point.
Right. And an attachment through the heart.
Exactly. Yeah. And not guarded. Yeah. And not just in the head either. So now your heart is available, and your heart's available because you're not still in the place of deep pain. The loss is still there. It never disappears, but the pain can softens over time. And so you can still access it. There are many times when I was teaching the grief course to the adoptive couples, and I'd be telling them my story and my tears would flow. And this is years and years later. But it was such a touching point for me. It wasn't that I hadn't finished my grief. It wasn't that I was still, oh goodness, I still got work to do. No, it was still a tender spot. And that's okay. And that is heart. That's heart. That creates heart, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes. So beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And allows us to grow and become who we are supposed to become through this.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, yeah, I often what's your opinion on antidepressants? Because they might be needed initially, but they don't really allow you to go through that phase, you end up stuck.
Well, I've seen it from two different sides. So you've got some people who experience chronic depression, and you've got people who are experiencing situational depression. somebody experiencing chronic depression. And I remember talking to this one particular gal who actually had had a stillbirth, and she said, I am so afraid that I will get swallowed up in depression because she's been chronically depressed and had been on antidepressants most of her life. I'm so afraid that I'll get swallowed up that I don't want to go into my grief. So we talked about being able to adjust her prescription so that it could give her the ability to be able to move into her pain and not get swallowed in it. That is somebody that has experienced chronic depression for whatever reason, whatever that means. But that taught me a huge thing when she said that. I'm so afraid I'll get swallowed. I was like, wow, that's a big word. No wonder you don't want to go into your pain. Then we have situational depression, which is a sadness or a deep depression or deep sadness that's caused by the loss itself. And depending on how much resilience, how many coping tools, how many other losses somebody has experienced, there's so many variables that will impact whether or not they feel like they can even go into that place of pain. So some people may need to take the edge off it initially so that they can begin to go, okay, this is what grief is. This is what it looks like. Okay, I can do this. Okay, I've got this. And so it may be something that in situational depression, given the other factors for that particular person, it might be something that is important. I never said don't do it, but if you're doing it to never feel, then that will begin to have a backlash onto somebody for sure. So yeah, other ways, but it's so much related to the individual themselves, and how much resilience, how many other losses, how are those losses experienced? How did your family teach you how to grieve? All those kinds of things impact how we will move into our own pain.
Yeah. I love the book and how you approach it, because anything big in life, and I often tell my children that we often avoid it because we don't know how we're going to resolve it.
Yes.
But just to know what to do now,
Yes,
in the moment, will allow you to find the next step. And that's really where the courage comes, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Allowing.
It's interesting because our book has those moments in the different colors, red to orange to yellow to green to turquoise to light blue. And somebody will pick up the book and they're in the red place, but they've got to read the light blue first. They want to know, okay, how's the story? Where am I headed? Right? Some people need to go in the middle and go, okay, I'm not there yet, but okay. And then they will go back to the red. And some people will stay in that red section in the book and just read it over and over and over and over again. Everybody's so unique how they use this book. Yeah, absolutely. But it teaches, but it can bring hope because there is a way through. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hope is so key.
Yes, absolutely.
There's it's a German way of looking at healing, and how these deep griefs also produce a physical symptom that can show up, a few months later.
Absolutely.
And it's actually the body's way of reacting to the grief and helping us heal. But I think that's important to recognize too, that something that shows up weeks later that's physical can be part of your healing process and not something to be freaked out about necessarily, right?
Absolutely. Your body, every single part of you, your mind, your soul, your emotions, your heart, your body, every part of you has been hit with this loss. And we often don't think about the physical. It was interesting. I met with a medical doctor who had also experienced miscarriage and stillbirth. And we talked about the physical impact of loss. And she had never put that together before as a medical doctor. And because she was feeling these stomach cramps that she'd never had before. And, or somebody else might feel headaches, or somebody might feel tingling in their limbs, or there can be all kinds of things, but your body truly has been impacted by this. This is something you would know way more about than I do. And I'm sure you've seen many people who come in wondering what's wrong with me. And as you hear the story, you'll know that some of this is absolutely as a result of the loss, a loss that hasn't had a chance to get expressed yet, or is early in its expression.
Yeah. As a homeopath, we see everything as a whole. So when you see a physical symptom, you know it's a mirror of what has happened or going on in the
Exactly.
mind. But
Yeah.
it's German new medicine. I couldn't bring it out, but
Okay.
I've only touched on it, but it really resonates because it's similar to what homeopathy says.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so, yeah.
And having that holistic approach also then helps you as you think about moving through grief. Okay, what does my body need? My body needs to drink water. My body needs to be warm. My body needs to eat some nutrition. So my body needs that. What does my heart need? My heart needs compassion. What does my head need? My head needs to understand some things here. You know, and you can begin to just like all of those parts of yourself are on this journey with you, and keeping it whole like that is really, really helpful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in your personal experience, when you were in deep grief, did you find your body holding that energy somewhere? Like often I'll find, anxiety or grief, you bundle it up in a certain place in your body, and then just
Mm-hmm.
be aware that you need to let that energy flow again throughout your whole body is important too.
That's a good question. When I think back to that moment of being in my dark pit, I would say that I was holding that in my stomach, in my abdomen, almost where, I would have been carrying a baby. Like that was my place of holding it tight. And yeah, I would, get diarrhea, and I, couldn't eat, and certain smells of food, and, those kinds of things. Like food was a thing. And sometimes I'd be really hungry, and then other times I wouldn't be. And so absolutely, absolutely. It really impacted my whole digestive system, my stomach. Yeah, that's where I held it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if you help people, even with a diagnosis, because that is also shocking, and you go into grief immediately.
Yeah.
Have you had experiences with that you could share?
Like just like
Like a terminal diagnosis, like,
right. Yeah. Absolutely. It's again, it's the movement through, like your body has just been assaulted, either because you've heard news, or you've put pieces together, and the shock is undeniable. And it's like, I remember talking to adoptive couples, and it's the same kind of thing. This can't be my story. This is you've got the wrong file. You've got the wrong diagnosis. I need another opinion. And there's this frantic, wide open, I can't get my head around it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't go with where my life was headed. And that early place is like, I can think of a deer in the headlights. It's like, even when I'm talking about it, my eyes get really wide open, and it's like, oh my God, this isn't, no. And you just want to push it away. No, 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 no. I don't know what to do with that. I don't want it. I don't see it. I don't want anything to do with it. And yeah, there's this like big, no, I will not accept this. And not unusual when there's that huge life altering diagnosis or huge shift. Like I just think of people who've, thought they were going in for a job upgrade and whatever, and they end up being fired on that particular day, like that just suddenly halted, and that's hard.
right? Yeah. It's so shocking.
Yes.
And yeah, so the reaction is no, this can't be happening. But like you're saying, to go through it and see it as, in the end, it can be a gift.
Eventually, but that's not the starting place. It's kind of
Right.
like how people would say to me, oh, well, at least you know you can get pregnant. Or, well, at least, you know, there must have been something wrong with the child. Well, those are all true things, but I'm not ready to hear that. I have to go through the emotion. I have to get to the mind part of it. And that's not until about, you know, the green is when we start putting pieces together. But people want to offer you green comments when you're in red. And it's like, I don't want to hear them.
Yeah.
100% true, whatever you want to, like, yeah, but I don't want to hear them. It's not helpful. And so that's something that's really important for people who are supporting people who are experiencing loss, to know, you know what, this isn't about you teaching them what they need to learn through this, that they have to discover that themselves. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is all incredible information. So to to finish up, what would you leave people with? What they can, some last nuggets of wisdom that you've gained? What could you tell them to do?
I I would sure I would want them to perhaps shift their paradigm in the way they think about grief. Grief is not your enemy. It's not something to be avoided, whether it's in yourself or if it's in a friend that you see who is grieving. And rather, it's show up to your grief, show up to your moment in grief, show up as a friend supporting, not coming with all the answers, not knowing exactly how this is going to be unfolding. I love the word mystery, and I think there's a lot of mystery in grief. You don't know how you're going to be impacted. When I was lying in the hospital with my miscarriage, I had no clue the end of the story, or that I'd be doing adoption work and all of that. No, I needed to be in the moment. I needed to be in the pit. That's where my moment was. My friend showed up and was just with me. So it's not about being avoiding grief. It's about showing up to it, letting grief teach you, and finding the ways that are going to work for you as you grieve. What do you need? And that's exactly why we created this book series, because a lot of people don't know what they need. And they're new to their grief. And there are good ways that you can find your way through your grief, and you will be changed. Your grief will forever be a part of you. You will be changed. And that isn't a bad thing. And it's okay. It's okay. Remember, it's okay. When Marina and I were thinking about a title for the book series, it's like, I was just like, well, you know, we kept saying these words, and then we suddenly went, that's the title. Remember, it's okay. It's okay to feel it. It's okay to be present. It's okay to have the memories. It's okay not to have the memories. It's okay to have tears. It's okay not to have tears. Your journey is your journey, and you can embrace that.
And yeah, and just accepting whatever comes, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So how do people find this series of books? And I believe you have a website as well.
Yes, yeah, we've created a website, the name of the book, www.remember. We put it is okay, even though the book is it's okay. So rememberitisok.ca. And there we talk about the colors in the book. We show some pages in the book and give you lots of information, and then also where you can find the books and buy it right now. And so they are available. We have 3 more coming out next spring. So the ones available right now are loss of a partner, loss of a parent, and then loss for teens. And then in the spring, there'll be loss of a pet, loss of a sibling or friend, and loss of a child. And it's interesting because Marina's loss, my co-author, is the loss of her dear husband. So that was the first book we wrote, loss of a partner. And my loss is the loss of little Adam through miscarriage. And so we've bookended our series with that loss of the child. So it's been an interesting journey, but yeah, they are available and there are more coming. So yeah, hopefully you'll be able to find them.
And we've all been touched by grief. And I feel that I personally would like to read these books because it just gives you the tools that are just so important. And like you say, to connect to it, connect to your heart.
Yes.
And it's really a part of life. It's like we don't get taught these things.
No, not in our society. Our North American society is very grief avoidant. And it's, quick, get back to normal. Well, normal doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Normal doesn't exist. I have to find my new normal, and that is a process.
And my new self.
My new self. Yeah. Yeah. All of those pieces. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Marian, for sharing. And are you available one-on-one if someone needed you?
I'm not doing one-on-one work right now. I will respond to an email and help people find the supports. I've stepped back from that to focus in on the books and a broader scope through teaching and training.
Yeah, and they can help so many more.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your caring and wisdom and your heart.
You're welcome.
And to everyone out there, don't forget, don't give away your power to anyone else. Go find it, spiral up and spiral out.